They buried a homeless Navy SEAL beneath a collapsing mountain. Then his loyal dog uncovered a fortune no one was meant to find. Caleb Mercer had lost his home, his family, and nearly his hope, but he refused to abandon the one partner who never abandoned him: his retired military German shepherd, Titan. High in Colorado's frozen mountains, one avalanche changed everything, uncovering a secret powerful enough to destroy corrupt men and restore a forgotten hero's life. Comment 1 if you believe Caleb and Titan will win, or 0 if you think the mountain will defeat them, and tell us where you're watching from. What if the loneliest place in America wasn't hiding a curse, but the second chance that two forgotten heroes never believed they deserved? By the time the last rays of October sunlight slipped behind the jagged peaks of the San Juan Mountains, Caleb Mercer had stopped counting the days. Time no longer meant birthdays or holidays. It wasn't measured by calendars or clocks. It was measured by snowfall, empty food cans, aching joints, and the number of nights he woke gasping from dreams that still smelled like burning diesel fuel and gunpowder. At 47 years old, Caleb had become a ghost long before anyone declared him missing. The abandoned miner's cabin perched on the mountainside looked as though one more hard winter might erase it forever. Half the roof sagged beneath decades of snow damage. Weathered boards rattled whenever the wind swept down from the high ridges. Rusted mining equipment lay scattered across the clearing, like forgotten skeletons from another century. Most people saw ruin. Caleb saw shelter. He sat quietly on the worn wooden porch, wrapped in an old military field jacket faded almost white across the shoulders. Deep lines framed a face that looked older than 47. His thick beard carried streaks of gray, while a faded scar crossed his left cheekbone, a reminder from a deployment few people knew about, and even fewer wanted to hear. Beside him lay Titan. The large German shepherd rested with his head across Caleb's boot, his amber eyes constantly scanning the darkening forest below. Though officially retired years earlier, nothing about the dog suggested retirement. His ears remained alert. Every unfamiliar sound drew his attention. Every shift in the wind mattered. Only one thing had changed. Whenever Caleb's breathing became uneven, Titan quietly leaned against him before panic could fully take hold. No command, no words, just instinct forged through years of serving beside soldiers who often carried invisible wounds home. Caleb reached down and rested a weathered hand on the dog's neck. "You still checking my 6?" Titan answered with nothing more than a slow wag of his tail. It was enough. Far below, the tiny mining town of Silver Creek shimmered beneath the evening sky. Warm lights glowed through windows. Families gathered around dinner tables. Pickup trucks rolled slowly down Main Street. Smoke drifted from chimneys into the cold mountain air. It looked close enough to touch. Yet Caleb hadn't walked through town in nearly 3 weeks. People remembered uniforms. They rarely remembered the men after the uniforms disappeared. He preferred it that way. The silence around the abandoned mine never asked uncomfortable questions. It never thanked him for his service. It never pitied him. The mountain simply existed, and somehow, that honesty felt comforting. A cold breeze swept across the ridge, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and fresh snow. Titan suddenly lifted his head. His nose twitched. Caleb noticed immediately. "What is it, partner?" The dog stared into the dense forest for several seconds before relaxing again. Probably elk. Maybe deer. Nothing unusual. Still, Caleb quietly memorized the direction. Old habits refused to die. Inside the cabin, a small wood stove crackled softly. The structure offered little comfort, but Caleb had spent weeks reinforcing weak walls using discarded lumber scavenged from abandoned mining sheds scattered across the property. Plastic tarps covered holes in the roof. Rain barrels collected water whenever the weather allowed. Military discipline had transformed disaster into survival. Every item had its place. Every tool remained clean. Every morning followed the same schedule. Wake before sunrise. Check weather. Gather water. Inspect cabin. Exercise Titan. Search for firewood. Maintain equipment. Repeat. Routine was stronger than fear. Routine silenced memories, at least for a little while. He stepped inside, ducking beneath the low doorway. Photographs no longer decorated his walls. The foreclosure had taken those. His wedding album, family portraits, the framed certificate honoring 22 years of military service. Even the folded American flag presented at his father's funeral had disappeared somewhere during the bank's inventory process. Material things were easy to lose. Some memories weren't. Caleb carefully unfolded an old topographic map across the rough wooden table. The faded paper showed forgotten mining claims stretching across dozens of mountain ridges. Most had closed before World War II. This particular claim carried a handwritten label in faded ink. Broken Ridge Mine. Status abandoned, inactive, unsafe. Exactly why nobody wanted it, which made it affordable enough for a homeless veteran who owned little more than an aging pickup truck, basic camping supplies, and a retired military dog. Technically, the land belonged to no one willing to fight over it anymore. At least that's what the county clerk had told him months earlier when he signed paperwork transferring responsibility for maintaining the abandoned claim. No one mentioned how isolated it truly was. No one mentioned the brutal winters. No one mentioned the stories. The locals certainly did. The first morning, Caleb bought supplies in Silver Creek. An elderly waitress at the diner quietly stopped pouring coffee after hearing where he planned to stay. "You mean the old Broken Ridge place?" Caleb nodded. "If that's what they call it." She glanced toward the surrounding customers before lowering her voice. "Folks don't go up there." "Why?" "Mines swallowed men." He smiled politely. "Mines do that." She shook her head. "No." Her expression changed. "I mean after they stopped digging." Another old rancher joined the conversation without invitation. "My grandfather helped search for 3 prospectors back in the 60s. They never found them." Another customer added quietly. "Then 2 college kids disappeared hiking there in '83. The waitress crossed herself. "Mountain keeps what it wants." Caleb simply thanked them for breakfast. He had spent enough nights sleeping beneath enemy fire to know one simple truth. People feared stories. Soldiers feared facts. Old mines collapsed. Mountains killed careless people. That didn't make them haunted. Still, sometimes. Late at night, the mountain produced sounds difficult to explain. Long, distant groans drifted upward through the earth beneath the cabin floor. Not loud, not constant. Almost breathing. He never admitted hearing them, not even to himself. Titan usually responded first. The dog would lift his head. Listen. Then settle back down once the sounds faded. Tonight remained quiet. Outside, darkness spread rapidly across the valley. Caleb prepared a simple dinner consisting of canned beef stew heated over the stove. Titan waited patiently until Caleb filled his food bowl first. Still got better manners than most people. Titan ate happily. Caleb forced down several bites before his appetite disappeared. Pain medication had become a luxury he could no longer afford months ago. His back constantly reminded him. So did his knees. The doctors called it cumulative damage. Years carrying heavy gear through mountains much steeper than these. Years jumping from aircraft. Years surviving explosions close enough to permanently change how his spine moved. None of it mattered after retirement. Bills accumulated. Insurance changed. Savings vanished. Then came the foreclosure. He could still remember standing silently, while strangers photographed every room inside the house he'd built with his own hands after leaving the Navy. One man carrying a clipboard had smiled politely. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. This is just procedure." Procedure. Such a harmless word. It sounded cleaner than taking away someone's home. Caleb stared into the dancing firelight. Titan finished eating and quietly rested beside his chair. Without thinking, Caleb scratched behind the dog's ears. "I'm sorry, buddy." Titan looked up. "You deserved a backyard." Another pause. "Not this." The shepherd slowly placed one paw across Caleb's boot, the same gesture he'd made dozens of times during difficult nights overseas. Caleb smiled for the first time all day. You always did know when to interrupt. Outside, snowflakes began drifting gently through the darkness. The first real storm of the season had arrived. Wind swept through towering pine trees, carrying a low whistle across the abandoned mine entrance several hundred yards behind the cabin. Caleb stepped back onto the porch. The valley below glowed peacefully beneath scattered lights. Above him stretched endless mountains disappearing into gathering clouds. No traffic, no voices, no television. Only wind, only silence. Only Titan sitting faithfully beside him. For a long moment, Caleb wondered whether anyone would ever notice if he simply stayed here forever. Then Titan stood. The shepherd turned slowly toward the abandoned mine. Every muscle stiffened, his ears locked forward. A low growl vibrated deep inside his chest. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. Nothing moved. Only darkness. Only the old timber supports surrounding the forgotten mine entrance. Then, very faintly, from somewhere deep beneath the mountain, a long, hollow rumble echoed through the earth. Not loud enough to frighten most people, just enough to make Titan refuse to look away. Caleb narrowed his eyes. The mountain had spoken, and for reasons he couldn't explain. It sounded almost alive. The low rumble faded as quietly as it had begun, swallowed by the endless stillness of the San Juan Mountains. Caleb Mercer stood motionless on the porch, his eyes fixed on the abandoned mine entrance barely visible beneath the moonlight. Years of military training had taught him never to ignore unfamiliar sounds. Yet another part of him, the exhausted part that carried too many memories, refused to chase every mystery. Titan remained frozen. The German shepherd's ears stayed forward, his body tense, every instinct focused on the darkness beyond the cabin. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's shoulders. Easy. Titan slowly relaxed, though he continued watching the mine for another long moment before finally following Caleb inside. The old cabin greeted them with the comforting crackle of the wood stove. Outside, snow drifted steadily across the clearing, covering abandoned rails and rusted mining carts with a blanket of white. The storm softened the harsh landscape, making even broken things appear peaceful. For the first time in days, Caleb slept longer than 2 hours. It didn't last. The nightmare came without warning. The thunder of rotor blades, smoke rolling across a distant hillside, someone shouting coordinates through static. Then the explosion. Caleb bolted upright before dawn, breathing so hard his chest burned. For several terrifying seconds, the cabin disappeared. He wasn't in Colorado. He was back overseas. Every shadow became danger. Every creaking board sounded like incoming fire. His hands searched desperately for a rifle that hadn't belonged to him in years. Then something warm pressed firmly against his chest. Titan. The shepherd leaned into him with calm determination, refusing to move. Caleb closed his eyes. His breathing slowly matched the dog's steady rhythm. One breath, then another. After several minutes, the panic loosened its grip. "I'm here." His voice cracked. "I'm home." Titan answered with a soft nudge beneath Caleb's hand. The dog had performed this silent rescue hundreds of times. Doctors had called it interruption training. Caleb simply called it friendship. Morning arrived beneath thick gray clouds. The first heavy snow had transformed the mountains overnight. Every pine branch sagged beneath fresh powder. The creek below the cabin flowed slower now, thin sheets of ice forming along its edges. Winter had officially claimed the mountain. Caleb poured hot water into a dented metal cup before stepping outside. Cold air immediately filled his lungs. He welcomed it. The sharp sting reminded him he was alive. Titan bounded across the clearing, leaving perfect paw prints behind him before circling back with surprising energy for a retired military dog. "You've still got more gas than I do," the shepherd barked once. Caleb smiled. Yeah, I know." Every morning followed the same ritual. Not because anyone demanded it, because routine held his world together. He stretched stiff muscles while Titan waited patiently. Next came obedience drills. Sit. Instant. Stay. Titan didn't move. Down. Perfect. Finally, Caleb pointed toward a cluster of snow-covered pines. Search. The shepherd disappeared into the trees with remarkable speed. Minutes later, he returned carrying an old leather work glove buried beneath fresh snow. Caleb laughed quietly. "You'll never forget the job." Titan proudly dropped the glove at his boots. Years earlier, the same dog had located hidden explosives, missing Marines, and frightened civilians trapped beneath collapsed buildings. Now he searched for gloves. Neither of them complained. After breakfast, Caleb strapped an old axe across his back and headed toward the forest. Firewood meant survival. Every fallen tree represented another warm night. The snow muffled every sound except the rhythmic strikes of steel against wood. Chunk by chunk, the growing pile beside his sled increased. Titan wandered nearby, occasionally stopping to sniff unfamiliar scents before returning to Caleb's side. Hours passed peacefully. It was exactly the kind of silence Caleb had searched for ever since leaving the Navy. No phones, no crowded streets, no unexpected questions, just wind, trees, snow, and the steady companionship of the one soul who had never abandoned him. By early afternoon, they began hauling the wood back toward the cabin. As the roof came into view, Caleb paused. Fresh tire tracks cut through the snow. His heartbeat quickened. Nobody should have been here. The tracks stopped near the porch before turning around. No vehicle remained. Caleb instinctively crouched. Titan immediately mirrored the movement. Together they studied the clearing. No voices. No smoke. No movement. Only silence. Caleb slowly approached the cabin. The front door remained closed exactly as he'd left it. Nothing appeared disturbed. Inside, everything rested in its proper place. His supplies, his maps, his blankets, the old coffee pot. Nothing missing. Nothing damaged. Yet someone had definitely come. On the rough wooden table sat a single folded piece of paper, weighed down by a smooth river stone. Caleb carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, old-fashioned, almost elegant. It read, "You should leave before the first deep snow. The mountain doesn't forgive." He turned the paper over. Blank. No signature. Titan sniffed the note briefly before walking to the window overlooking the abandoned mine. Again, the shepherd stared toward the entrance. Long, silent, watching. Caleb folded the paper into his jacket pocket. Probably one of the locals trying to scare away outsiders. Maybe an old rancher. Maybe someone who believed the stories. Still, whoever left it had climbed nearly 6 miles into the mountains during the first snowstorm simply to deliver a warning. That thought lingered longer than Caleb expected. Late that afternoon, he decided to make the weekly trip into Silver Creek. Supplies were running low. Titan jumped into the passenger seat of Caleb's aging pickup truck as naturally as he always had. The engine protested before finally coming to life. The winding mountain road descended through towering evergreens until the quiet valley opened below. Silver Creek looked almost frozen in time. Brick storefronts lined the narrow main street. An old railroad depot stood empty near the edge of town. American flags fluttered gently despite the cold. Most people knew Caleb only as the quiet veteran with the German shepherd. Some waved politely. Others simply nodded. He preferred nods. Inside Harper's General Store, the warmth smelled of coffee, cedar shelves, and fresh bread. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, who owned the store with her late husband's photograph still hanging proudly behind the register, smiled as Caleb entered. "Good morning." "Morning." She reached beneath the counter. "I saved something for Titan." She produced 2 large dog biscuits. Titan accepted them gently from her hand. He never forgets his manners. He had good teachers. Mrs. Harper's smile faded slightly. "Mountain treating you all right?" Caleb hesitated. "It's quiet." She looked toward the snow-covered peaks through the front window. Quiet can be deceiving. Before Caleb could answer, an elderly man loading feed into his cart glanced over. "You staying up at Broken Ridge?" Caleb nodded. The old rancher sighed. "My father mined there." Caleb waited. He used to say the mountain always gives you one warning. And after that? The rancher met his eyes. It stops asking. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Caleb thanked Mrs. Harper for the supplies, loaded everything into the truck, and drove back toward the mountains. The sun was already sinking. Golden light painted the snowy ridges in brilliant orange before fading into deep blue. As the truck climbed the final switchbacks toward the abandoned mine, Titan suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood straight. His nose pressed against the side window. He wasn't looking toward the road. He was looking higher, toward the cliffs towering above the cabin. Caleb slowed the truck. There, high against the rocks, for only a heartbeat. He thought he saw the silhouette of someone standing perfectly still, watching them. Then the figure disappeared behind drifting snow. Caleb stepped on the brakes. Titan barked sharply. The mountain had begun asking questions, and neither of them knew who, or what, was waiting for the answers. Caleb kept his foot on the brake, staring toward the rocky ridge where the figure had vanished. Snow drifted across the mountainside in slow white ribbons. Nothing moved. No footprints. No silhouette. Only weathered granite and towering pines standing against the fading evening sky. Titan let out another sharp bark. Not frightened. Alert. The kind of bark Caleb had learned to trust long before either of them came to Colorado. He switched off the truck's engine. Silence settled over the valley. The kind of silence that seemed almost too complete. Caleb opened the driver's door. Cold mountain air rushed in. He crouched beside the truck, instinctively scanning the ridgeline the way he'd once searched distant rooftops through a rifle scope. Old habits never disappeared. They simply waited. Titan moved ahead several yards before stopping. The German shepherd sniffed the fresh snow carefully. His nose followed a faint scent toward the edge of the clearing before abruptly stopping. The dog tilted his head, confused. Whatever had been there was already gone. Caleb looked down. The untouched snow revealed no human tracks, only rabbit prints, a few deer, and Titan's own paw marks. He slowly exhaled. Maybe exhaustion was beginning to play tricks on him. PTSD often blurred the line between caution and imagination. He understood that better than anyone. Still, Titan had seen something too. That mattered. "Come on, partner." The shepherd obeyed immediately. though he glanced one last time toward the cliffs before following Caleb inside. Night settled quickly over Broken Ridge Mine. The wind strengthened after sunset, rattling loose boards against the cabin walls. Caleb added fresh logs to the stove while Titan stretched beside the fire. Warm orange light danced across rough timber walls blackened by decades of smoke. For a few peaceful minutes, the cabin almost felt like home. Caleb opened an old notebook resting beside his cot. Inside were handwritten observations from the past several months. Weather patterns, animal sightings, food supplies, trail conditions. Small routines helped organize a mind that too often wandered into darker places. He turned to a blank page. November 3rd. Heavy snowfall. Unknown visitor. Warning note. Possible movement on Eastern Ridge. Titan confirmed. He paused before writing one final line. Mine sounds increasing. The words looked strangely unsettling on paper. Closing the notebook, Caleb poured hot coffee into a dented enamel mug and sat beside the small window overlooking the abandoned mine entrance. Moonlight reflected across fresh snow. The rusted steel gate blocking the old tunnel shimmered faintly beneath a thin layer of ice. Everything appeared perfectly still. Until Titan stood. Without making a sound, the German shepherd walked toward the door. His ears rose, every muscle tightened. Caleb quietly set down his mug. What do you hear? Titan didn't look away. The answer came moments later. A deep vibration rolled beneath the cabin floor. Not violent, not loud. Just enough for the wooden walls to tremble slightly. The old lantern hanging above the table swung gently. Then another vibration followed. Longer, deeper, almost rhythmic. Caleb frowned. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from below. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The cold struck immediately. Titan moved ahead of him, carefully descending the narrow trail leading toward the abandoned mine. Snow crunched beneath their boots and paws. The rumbling grew slightly stronger. Caleb reached the weathered steel gate that sealed the entrance. The rusted bars stood twisted after decades of mountain winters. Beyond them stretched complete darkness. He swept the flashlight across the opening. Old support beams, broken rail tracks, collapsed equipment, nothing unusual. Then Titan began growling, not aggressively, uncertainly. The shepherd approached the gate until his nose nearly touched the iron bars. He sniffed several times, then backed away. Instead of retreating toward the cabin, he slowly turned left, following the rock wall bordering the entrance. Caleb watched carefully. Titan stopped beside a section of weathered stone covered in moss and snow. The dog scratched twice at the ground, then looked back. What is it? Titan scratched again. Caleb brushed away several inches of snow with his boot. Beneath the frozen surface lay old wooden planks almost completely buried beneath dirt and pine needles. They looked unnatural, deliberately placed. He knelt beside them. The boards felt surprisingly solid despite their age. Using the edge of his boot, he cleared away more debris. A narrow gap appeared between two planks. Cold air drifted upward. Caleb held his flashlight near the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness. A shaft. He whispered the words more to himself than to Titan. An old ventilation opening. Long forgotten. Too narrow for a person. Large enough for air to move freely through the mountain, which explained the strange drafts inside the abandoned mine. It also explained the low sounds traveling beneath the cabin. The mountain wasn't haunted. It was breathing. Caleb smiled faintly. Mystery solved. Or so he believed. Titan didn't share his confidence. The shepherd refused to leave the hidden shaft. Instead, he sniffed the air repeatedly before stepping back. His ears remained fixed on the darkness below. Caleb gently rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. "We'll check it tomorrow." They returned to the cabin. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the fire slowly burned lower. Hours later, Caleb drifted into uneasy sleep. The dream arrived almost immediately. He found himself walking through endless underground tunnels. Not the abandoned mine. Another place. Another country. Men shouted somewhere ahead. Dust filled the air. Titan barked frantically. Then complete darkness swallowed everything. Caleb awoke before dawn. His heart pounded. Sweat soaked his shirt despite the freezing cabin. Titan already stood beside the bed. The dog placed one paw against Caleb's chest until his breathing slowed. "I'm okay." His voice sounded unconvinced. After sunrise, Caleb decided to inspect the mine more carefully. Winter would soon make gathering firewood difficult. Old abandoned tunnels often contained dry timber discarded decades earlier. If he collected enough now, they could survive the harshest months. He packed carefully. Flashlight, extra batteries, small first aid kit, rope, crowbar, work gloves. Military habit demanded preparation. Titan watched every movement. When Caleb picked up the flashlight, the German shepherd immediately walked to the door. "I figured you'd insist." The climb to the mine entrance felt different in daylight. Fresh snow reflected brilliant morning light across the surrounding peaks. Eagles circled high overhead. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet the warning note inside Caleb's pocket remained impossible to ignore. "You should leave before the first deep snow." He reached the rusted gate once more. After several minutes of effort, he managed to pull part of it open just wide enough to squeeze through. Rust groaned loudly. Dust drifted from ancient hinges. Cold air flowed steadily from the darkness beyond. Titan hesitated. Not from fear, from caution. Caleb noticed. "You stay close." The flashlight beam sliced through blackness. Massive timber supports stretched overhead. Old rail tracks disappeared deep into the mountain. Broken ore carts rested exactly where miners had abandoned them generations earlier. Dust floated lazily through the cold air. Everything smelled of damp earth, rusted steel, and forgotten history. Every step echoed softly. Caleb estimated the main tunnel stood nearly 15 feet wide. Surprisingly stable. He examined several support beams. Weathered, cracked, but still holding. Scattered across the floor lay dozens of broken wooden braces. Perfect firewood. Exactly what he'd hoped to find. He began stacking smaller pieces near the entrance. Titan wandered only a few yards away, nose constantly working. Suddenly, the shepherd froze. His head turned toward a narrow side tunnel, almost hidden behind collapsed debris. A faint current of air drifted from the darkness. Titan stepped closer, then barked once. Short, sharp, intentional. Caleb walked toward him. The side passage appeared completely blocked. At least, almost completely. Between two fallen beams, barely visible beneath centuries of dust, a narrow opening remained. Cold air flowed steadily through it. Far below, somewhere beyond solid rock, a deep rumble echoed once again, long, slow, almost like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Titan stared into the darkness without blinking. Then, for the third time since winter began, he scratched at the stone. Not randomly, always the same place, as though something on the other side wanted desperately to be found. Neither Caleb nor Titan had any idea that hidden behind those ancient walls lay the secret that would change both of their lives forever. Caleb rested the flashlight against one of the old support beams and studied the narrow opening hidden behind the collapsed timbers. The cold draft flowing through the crack was steady. Somewhere beyond the blocked passage, another chamber still breathed. He reached forward and pressed one gloved hand against the ancient rock. Solid. unmoving. Whatever lay beyond would have to wait. He wasn't here to explore forgotten tunnels. He was here to survive the winter. "Firewood first," he muttered. Titan remained near the opening, refusing to leave it. The German shepherd sniffed once more before reluctantly following Caleb back toward the main tunnel. For nearly an hour, Caleb worked methodically. Broken support beams littered the floor where miners had abandoned repairs generations earlier. He cut the longer timbers into manageable lengths with an old handsaw and stacked them near the entrance. Each piece meant another night of warmth, another day alive. The rhythm soothed him. Lift, cut, stack, repeat. The work pushed away memories that no medication had ever truly erased. Outside, however, the mountain had begun changing. Heavy clouds swallowed the morning sun. Wind accelerated through the narrow valleys, driving fresh snow sideways across the ridge. High above Broken Ridge Mine, thousands of tons of fresh powder clung to steep granite slopes. Waiting. Caleb noticed none of it. Deep underground, time disappeared. Titan suddenly stopped beside one of the old rail tracks. His ears rose. He looked upward. A faint shower of dust drifted from the ceiling. The shepherd barked once. Caleb immediately looked up. Tiny grains of dirt floated through the flashlight beam. He frowned. Old mines settled constantly. This wasn't unusual. Still, Titan barked again. Sharper this time. "What is it?" Before the dog could respond with another warning, a deep crack echoed somewhere far above them. The sound rolled through the tunnel like distant thunder. Every instinct Caleb possessed awakened instantly. He dropped the bundle of firewood. "Move!" Titan didn't hesitate. The shepherd sprinted toward the entrance. Caleb followed. Another crack split the silence. Louder. Closer. The tunnel floor vibrated beneath his boots. Years of combat had trained him to recognize danger before his mind could explain it. This wasn't settling. The mountain was failing. "Run!" The next sound wasn't a crack. It was an explosion. The ceiling behind them collapsed with terrifying force. Ancient support beams snapped like dry twigs. Boulders the size of pickup trucks crashed through the tunnel, dragging mud, shattered timber, and centuries of loose rock behind them. The air itself seemed to explode. The shockwave hurled Caleb forward. His flashlight flew from his hand, spinning wildly across the dirt before coming to rest against a broken rail. Everything vanished inside a choking cloud of dust. Titan barked frantically somewhere ahead. Caleb struggled to breathe. The world became darkness. Stone slammed against stone. Wood splintered. The roar seemed endless. Then, silence. Not true silence. The kind that follows disaster. Broken only by falling pebbles ticking softly across the tunnel floor. Caleb pushed himself onto one knee. Every muscle screamed. His shoulder burned where he had struck the ground. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow. "Titan!" His voice disappeared into the dust. Another bark answered, closer than he expected. Relief flooded through him. "I'm here!" The German shepherd emerged from the haze, rushing toward Caleb before pressing against his side as if confirming he was still alive. Caleb wrapped one arm around the dog's neck for only a moment. "You okay?" Titan licked his hand. "No obvious injuries." "Lucky. Very lucky." Caleb grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the tunnel entrance. His heartbeat stopped. Where the opening had stood only seconds earlier, now rose a mountain of shattered rock. Massive slabs of granite completely filled the passage from floor to ceiling. The daylight was gone. The exit no longer existed. For several long seconds, Caleb simply stared. His military training forced his breathing under control before panic could take hold. Assess. Don't react. assess. He slowly approached the collapse. Fresh fractures ran through the surrounding walls. Loose stones continued falling. The debris pile stretched nearly 30 feet. Impossible to climb. Impossible to move. He reached out and placed one hand against the cold rock. Solid. The mountain had sealed itself. Titan sniffed desperately between narrow cracks. No daylight. No fresh air beyond faint currents filtering through tiny gaps. The dog whined softly. Caleb swallowed. "We're trapped." The words sounded strangely calm. Inside, fear tried to force its way forward. He refused to let it. Not yet. He switched off the flashlight for 1 second. Absolute darkness swallowed everything. Even Titan disappeared. Caleb immediately turned the light back on. Battery power would now become life. He checked his gear. Flashlight. Half-full canteen. Pocket knife. Crowbar. 50 feet of climbing rope. Small first aid kit. 1 energy bar. Not enough, far from enough. He closed his eyes. Think. The tunnel still had airflow. That meant another connection existed somewhere. Old mines almost always contained ventilation systems, secondary shafts, escape passages. If they could find one. Titan suddenly pulled away. His nose stayed low to the ground. The shepherd moved deeper into the mine, away from the collapse, away from daylight. Caleb hesitated. Easy. Titan barked once, then continued walking, not running, leading. Caleb followed. The flashlight beam swept across ancient walls scarred by pickaxes wielded more than a century earlier. Old wooden signs pointed toward forgotten drifts whose lettering had long since faded. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead. The air grew colder, fresher. Titan stopped near the side passage they had discovered earlier that morning, the same narrow opening hidden behind fallen timbers. The dog barked again, more urgently now. Caleb understood. The airflow. It was stronger here. He knelt beside the collapsed beams. Cold air flowed steadily through the narrow gap, enough to stir loose dust, enough to carry hope. He wedged the crowbar beneath the nearest timber and pushed with all his strength. Nothing. Again. The beam shifted slightly. Titan immediately began clawing dirt away from the lower edge of the opening. Together, man and dog worked in desperate silence. Minutes passed. Sweat rolled despite the freezing air. Finally, one rotten support beam snapped. The opening widened several inches. Fresh air rushed through. Caleb smiled for the first time since the collapse. "We've got something." Then the mountain growled again. A deep vibration rolled beneath their feet. Another shower of dust drifted from above. The unstable passage could collapse completely at any moment. Caleb looked toward Titan. The shepherd wasn't watching the ceiling. He stared through the widening gap. His ears stood perfectly straight. Then he began barking with a determination Caleb had never heard before. Not fear, not warning, excitement, as though he sensed something waiting beyond the darkness. Caleb raised the flashlight and shined it through the opening. The narrow beam disappeared into a hidden chamber untouched by daylight for generations. He couldn't see the floor. He couldn't see the walls. Only endless darkness. Somewhere inside that forgotten part of the mountain, a faint current of air carried an unfamiliar scent. Earth, stone, and something else. Something neither soldier could yet recognize. Caleb tightened his grip on the crowbar. "If that's our way out." He looked at Titan. "Then we're going." The German shepherd stepped forward without hesitation. Behind them, the collapsed entrance buried the world they knew. Ahead waited only darkness, and the first step toward a discovery that would rewrite both of their destinies. Caleb tightened both hands around the rusted crowbar and wedged it beneath another rotting timber. One more. The old beam groaned. Titan dug furiously beside him, sending loose dirt and broken stones sliding backward across the tunnel floor. With a sharp crack, the century-old support finally gave way. A rush of cold air burst through the opening with surprising force. Caleb instinctively stepped back. The stale air inside the mine instantly mixed with something cleaner, fresher. The hidden chamber beyond wasn't sealed after all. It was connected to the mountain. Hope returned faster than he expected. If air's moving, he looked toward Titan. There has to be another way out. The German shepherd didn't wait for permission. Lowering his shoulders, Titan squeezed through the narrow opening first. His claws scraped against stone before disappearing into complete darkness. For a heartbeat, Caleb could see nothing beyond the beam of his flashlight. Then Titan barked. Once, confident, not frightened. Caleb removed his backpack, pushed it ahead of him, and carefully crawled through the tight passage. Sharp rock scraped against his jacket. Loose gravel shifted beneath his knees. For several tense seconds, the mountain seemed determined to trap him forever. Then the space widened. He dropped nearly 3 feet onto solid ground inside a chamber untouched by human hands for generations. The flashlight swept slowly across the darkness. His breath caught. The cavern was enormous. Natural stone walls stretched upward beyond the reach of the light. Ancient wooden platforms clung to one side of the chamber, their supports leaning at dangerous angles. Rusted ore carts rested where miners had abandoned them decades earlier. Thick mineral deposits shimmered faintly along the damp walls. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling into shallow pools below. Everything remained perfectly still, almost sacred. Titan stood 20 yards ahead, nose pressed close to the ground. Instead of searching for an exit, he followed an invisible scent winding deeper into the cavern. Caleb hurried after him. Easy. The shepherd slowed but refused to stop. The airflow strengthened with every step. Somewhere nearby, another opening reached the outside world. Relief washed over Caleb. They weren't going to die underground. Not today. The path narrowed between towering stone pillars before opening into a theater tunnel unlike anything Caleb had seen before. The walls looked different. The rock changed from dark gray shale into brilliant white quartz streaked with black mineral bands. Even under the flashlight's weak beam, the stone reflected light in strange patterns. Titan suddenly froze. His ears stood straight. Then he walked directly toward one section of fractured rock. He sniffed carefully, scratched once, twice, then began pawing harder. Dust spilled across the floor. Caleb approached slowly. "What have you got?" The shepherd continued scratching the same place. Not randomly, with purpose. Caleb crouched beside him. Fresh cracks spread across the quartz wall. The avalanche must have sent tremendous pressure through this section of the mountain. One large slab had shifted several inches away from the surrounding rock. He wedged the crowbar into the fracture. Pushed. Nothing. He adjusted the angle. Pushed harder. The stone suddenly lurched forward. A heavy chunk broke free and crashed onto the floor with a thunderous echo. Dust filled the air. Titan stepped backward. Caleb raised the flashlight. At first he saw only broken quartz. Then, something caught the light. A narrow ribbon of dull yellow curved through the fractured stone. Not painted, not stained, embedded. He frowned. His pulse quickened. Slowly he knelt beside the fallen slab. The yellow metal twisted naturally through the white quartz like roots growing through frozen ground. It didn't glitter like costume jewelry. It glowed. Warm. Heavy. Ancient. Caleb reached out and brushed away loose dust with trembling fingers. The metal remained unchanged. His years in the Navy hadn't taught him much about geology, but growing up in Montana had. His grandfather had spent weekends searching riverbeds for minerals. He remembered one lesson clearly. Fool's gold fools your eyes. Real gold fools your hands. He pulled his survival knife from its sheath. Carefully, he pressed the blade against the yellow ribbon. The edge bit into the metal. Soft, not brittle, not flaky. The knife left a clean mark. Caleb stared silently. No. He whispered the word without realizing it. Titan tilted his head. Caleb chipped away a fist-sized piece of quartz. The rock nearly slipped from his hands. Far heavier than it looked. He weighed it carefully. Dense. Extremely dense. His breathing slowed, then quickened again. This can't be. He shined the flashlight toward the exposed wall. His heart nearly stopped. The yellow ribbon didn't end. It widened. Another vein crossed beneath it. Then another. They disappeared upward into the ceiling and downward into the mountain itself. The fractured wall wasn't revealing scattered pieces. It was exposing an entire vein. Massive, continuous, untouched. For several long moments, Caleb forgot about the collapse. Forgot about the blocked entrance. Forgot about hunger. Forgot about fear. He simply stared. Titan gently nudged his arm. The dog seemed less interested in the shining rock than in Caleb himself. Caleb laughed softly, a tired, unbelieving laugh. You found it. Titan wagged his tail. You actually found it. The shepherd licked Caleb's glove. Somewhere overhead, another faint rumble rolled through the mountain. Reality returned instantly. The mine remained unstable. The discovery meant nothing if they couldn't leave alive. Caleb forced himself to think clearly. He examined the chamber more carefully. Fresh air definitely entered from somewhere. The breeze wasn't imagination. Titan lifted his nose again. Without hesitation, he began following the current deeper into the tunnel. Within minutes, they reached another narrow passage. Unlike the first opening, this one sloped steadily upward. Snowmelt trickled down polished stone. Daylight. Very faint. Almost invisible, but unmistakable. Caleb smiled. There you are. The climb tested every aching muscle in his body. Loose rocks shifted beneath his boots. Several times he nearly lost his footing. Titan climbed ahead easily, stopping every few yards to look back, almost checking on him. The tunnel narrowed until Caleb had to crawl. Cold mountain air grew stronger. Then Titan disappeared through a jagged opening above. Bright white light flooded the passage. Caleb pulled himself upward one final time. His hands gripped frozen grass, then solid earth. He rolled onto the snowy mountainside beneath a brilliant blue sky. For several seconds he simply lay there, breathing deeply. Fresh air had never tasted sweeter. Titan bounded in circles around him before returning to press his head against Caleb's shoulder. We made it. Caleb closed his eyes. We actually made it. Far below, the old miner's cabin stood silent. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. The avalanche had scarred the mountainside, leaving a fresh path of broken trees stretching hundreds of yards downhill. The main entrance to Broken Ridge Mine remained completely buried. No one looking from outside would ever imagine another hidden route existed. Even fewer would suspect what remained hidden inside. Caleb slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The fist-sized quartz specimen rested exactly where he had placed it before climbing out. Its surprising weight reminded him this wasn't a dream. He brushed away another layer of dust. The golden ribbons gleamed once again beneath the afternoon sun. His mind raced through impossible questions. How large was the vein? Who had missed it? How could an entire mining operation abandon something like this? He looked back toward the hidden opening almost concealed beneath fallen brush and snow. The mountain had guarded its secret for more than a century. Only an avalanche, and one stubborn German shepherd, had uncovered it. Titan suddenly barked toward the valley below. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. Dark storm clouds were already gathering beyond the western peaks. Another winter front was moving in. They had little food, little firewood, and now, something far more valuable than either of them could fully comprehend. Caleb slipped the heavy stone safely into his backpack. "We don't tell anyone." Titan watched him quietly. "Not until we know exactly what this is." The shepherd gave a single soft bark. Together they started down the snowy slope toward the lonely cabin. Neither of them noticed the faint set of fresh tire tracks on the distant mountain road below. Someone else had entered Broken Ridge Valley that afternoon. And before another sunrise, the first person willing to steal their miracle would begin hunting for it. Snow fell steadily through the night, covering the mountain in a fresh layer of white that erased almost every sign of the avalanche. Almost. Caleb stood outside the cabin just after dawn, staring toward the scar cut across the mountainside. Beneath that blanket of snow lay the buried entrance to Broken Ridge Mine, while somewhere deeper inside the mountain, hidden beyond the collapse, stretched a vein of gold so vast it refused to leave his thoughts. Titan emerged from the cabin carrying one of Caleb's gloves in his mouth. "You think we should get moving?" The German shepherd dropped the glove at his boots and looked toward the old pickup truck. Caleb nodded. "So do I." He trusted his instincts, but he trusted Titan's even more. The sample rested inside a worn canvas backpack, wrapped carefully in an old wool blanket. Caleb had spent nearly an hour hiding it beneath spare clothing and camping supplies. He wasn't afraid someone would rob him on the mountain. He was afraid someone would recognize what he carried. The winding drive into Durango took nearly 2 hours. The higher elevations slowly gave way to open valleys where ranches stretched beneath gray skies. Snowplows pushed fresh powder from the highway, while pickup trucks passed with horse trailers and stacks of firewood. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Caleb almost envied that. Titan sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching every passing vehicle. Years of working together had created habits neither of them could break. Neither wanted to. The industrial district outside Durango stood in sharp contrast to the quiet mountains. Concrete warehouses replaced pine forests. Freight trucks rumbled through intersections. Old machine shops stood beside scrapyards and equipment dealers. Caleb finally stopped in front of a faded brick building with peeling paint. A weathered metal sign read, "Holloway Mineral and Assay Services." The windows were dusty. One fluorescent light flickered above the entrance. It looked forgotten, exactly the kind of place that attracted people asking quiet questions. Inside, the air smelled of machine oil, polishing compound, and old paper. Glass display cases held polished gemstones and small gold flakes mounted inside plastic cases. Behind the counter stood a heavy-set man in his early 60s with silver hair combed neatly backward. Dennis Holloway barely looked up from a ledger. "If you're selling family jewelry." Prices dropped again. Caleb remained silent. He carefully unwrapped the wool blanket and placed the quartz specimen onto the counter. The rock landed with a dull, heavy thud. Dennis looked up, then froze. His eyes narrowed. Without saying a word, he picked up a jeweler's loupe and leaned over the specimen. His expression changed almost immediately. First curiosity, then disbelief, then something Caleb recognized instantly: greed. Dennis carried the rock beneath a bright inspection lamp. He scraped one golden ribbon gently with a hardened steel pick. The metal bent. He frowned. Next, he reached for a small bottle of testing solution and placed one careful drop onto the exposed surface. Nothing happened. The yellow metal remained unchanged. Dennis slowly removed his glasses. His heartbeat seemed visible beneath his shirt. He forced himself to smile. Interesting piece. Caleb waited. Mostly quartz. Dennis shrugged casually. A little sulfide staining. Caleb said nothing. I'll give you... Dennis pretended to think, $400. Silence filled the shop. Caleb looked directly into the man's eyes. No. Dennis laughed awkwardly. 500. Still nothing. Look, Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer, honestly, it's just a curiosity. Caleb calmly reached for the specimen. I'll take it. Dennis's hand dropped onto the rock before Caleb could lift it. The friendly smile disappeared. You know, Dennis said quietly, people who carry things like this around usually attract attention. Caleb didn't answer. They asked the wrong questions. Titan rose silently beside Caleb's leg. The German shepherd wasn't growling. He didn't need to. Dennis noticed. His eyes shifted toward the dog. Caleb spoke softly. Remove your hand. Dennis hesitated. Titan took one slow step forward. Years of military service had taught the shepherd remarkable restraint. His posture alone carried unmistakable authority. Dennis slowly lifted his hand. Caleb wrapped the specimen once again. Thank you for your time. He turned toward the door. Dennis watched him leave. The instant Caleb's truck disappeared around the corner, Dennis hurried into the back office. He locked the door, then reached for his cell phone. The number wasn't saved under a name, only initials. GS, the call connected after 2 rings. A calm voice answered. This is Sloan. Dennis lowered his voice. You told me years ago to call if anything unusual ever came out of Broken Ridge. Silence. Then, I'm listening. Dennis swallowed. I think your company made the biggest mistake in its history. Across town, inside a sleek corner office overlooking downtown Durango, Garrett Sloan slowly stood from behind his polished walnut desk. At 53, he had built Sloan Development Group into one of the largest commercial real estate companies in western Colorado. People admired his success. Very few understood how often that success depended on finding desperate people, buying failing properties, foreclosures, tax sales, quiet acquisitions. He considered them business, nothing personal. Dennis continued speaking. An older guy brought me a quartz specimen this morning. So? It came from Broken Ridge. Garrett frowned. Impossible. Dennis looked toward the closed office door before continuing. It isn't impossible. It carries visible gold. Garrett remained silent. A lot of it. How much? Dennis answered carefully. If the sample represents the source. He paused. We're talking about something enormous. Garrett's expression hardened. Broken Ridge. The abandoned mining claim his company had acquired years earlier as part of a foreclosure package. Worthless, unstable, a financial liability. His attorneys had recommended transferring the neglected claim to the former owner during settlement, because maintaining it would cost more than the land could ever produce. That former owner, Caleb Mercer. Garrett opened a digital property file. There it was. Transfer completed. Ownership confirmed. His jaw tightened. We gave it back. Dennis quietly replied. Looks like you gave back more than a mountain. Garrett walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at him. This stays between us. I understand. You told no one else? No. Garrett thought for several long seconds, then smiled. Not with happiness, with calculation. If Mercer found something, his voice became almost a whisper. He doesn't yet know how to protect it. Dennis understood immediately. You want me to delay him? If he comes back? Garrett replied calmly, keep him talking. The call ended. Garrett pressed another number. His executive assistant answered immediately. I need every file we have on Caleb Mercer. Today? No. He looked toward the snow-covered mountains visible beyond the city skyline. Right now. Meanwhile, Caleb and Titan were already climbing back toward Broken Ridge. The conversation inside the assay office had left an uneasy feeling neither of them could ignore. Titan spent most of the drive staring into the side mirror, watching, listening. Twice he gave a quiet warning whine. Caleb checked behind them. Nothing. Still, the feeling remained. Halfway up the mountain road, he pulled onto a scenic overlook. The valley below stretched for miles beneath fresh snow. No vehicles, no movement. He stepped out of the truck. Cold wind rushed across the cliffs. Titan sniffed the air. Then suddenly turned toward the highway. A dark SUV rounded the distant bend. It slowed, just slightly. As it passed, the driver looked directly at Caleb before continuing without stopping. Caleb memorized the license plate automatically. Military habit. The SUV disappeared around the next curve. Titan continued watching long after it vanished. Caleb rested one hand on the shepherd's neck. I've got a feeling. He looked back toward the lonely mountain rising above them. Our quiet life just ended. High above, hidden beneath snow and stone, Broken Ridge waited in silence. But for the first time in more than a century, it no longer kept its secret alone. The first sign came before sunrise. Caleb was already awake, sitting beside the wood stove with a cup of black coffee warming his hands, while Titan slept near the door. A faint mechanical sound drifted through the trees. Not the wind, not wildlife. An engine. Caleb immediately stood. Titan was awake before Caleb reached the window. The German shepherd's ears snapped forward, and his body stiffened. Outside, pale morning light spilled across the snowy clearing. Far below, a pair of headlights moved slowly along the mountain road. Then another. 2 black SUVs. Neither belonged on Broken Ridge. Caleb quietly set the coffee mug aside. They found us. Titan gave a low growl. Caleb pulled on his old field jacket, clipped Titan's lead to his tactical harness, and stepped outside. The vehicles stopped nearly half a mile below the cabin. Doors opened. 4 men climbed out. All wore identical dark winter gear with no company logos. One unfolded a drone. Another studied a tablet displaying satellite imagery. Private security. Professional. Organized. Not local hunters. Not curious hikers. Caleb watched through a pair of military binoculars he had purchased years earlier at a surplus store. One man pointed directly toward the abandoned mine. Another pointed toward the cabin. They already knew exactly where to look. So much for keeping a secret. Titan remained perfectly silent. Years of military work had trained him never to bark unless ordered. The shepherd simply watched, waiting. Caleb lowered the binoculars. They're not here to help. Within minutes, the drone lifted into the gray morning sky. Its quiet electric motors barely disturbed the stillness. It climbed above the pine trees before slowly beginning a search pattern across the valley. Caleb immediately backed away from the clearing. No open ground. Titan followed without hesitation. Together they disappeared beneath dense evergreens where thick branches concealed them from above. Caleb knew drones. He had worked beside them during overseas operations. People looked for movement, shiny surfaces, straight lines. Discipline defeated technology more often than expensive equipment. He led Titan beneath fallen timber and over narrow animal trails invisible beneath fresh snow. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached a rocky overlook hidden beneath towering spruce trees. From there, Caleb could watch the cabin without being seen. The drone hovered over the roof, circled once, then twice. One of the security men entered the cabin. Another photographed the avalanche site. A third examined fresh footprints around the clearing. Caleb's expression hardened. They're mapping everything. Titan suddenly nudged Caleb's arm. The dog wasn't looking toward the cabin. He stared farther downhill. A fifth vehicle was climbing the mountain. Unlike the SUVs, this one was a white pickup truck. It stopped beside the others. A tall man wearing a charcoal overcoat stepped out. Even from a distance, his expensive clothes looked out of place against the snow-covered wilderness. He never touched the ground carelessly. Everything about him suggested control. Caleb focused the binoculars. The man accepted a folder from one of the guards. He studied photographs, then slowly looked toward the mountain, toward Caleb's home. Garrett Sloan. Caleb had never met him personally, but he remembered the name. The foreclosure documents had carried Sloan Development Group across every page. He remembered another name too, the attorney who had calmly explained why the abandoned mining claim was being transferred instead of maintained. At the time, Caleb had barely listened. He had been losing everything else. Now that forgotten paperwork suddenly mattered. Garrett spoke briefly with the security team before pointing toward the buried mine entrance. The men immediately spread out. Some began placing bright survey flags across the snow. Others unloaded steel barricades from the SUV's roadblocks. Caleb quietly lowered the binoculars. They're cutting us off. Titan looked toward him. Which means they don't know where the gold is. Not yet. That realization changed everything. If Garrett already knew the exact location of the vein, he wouldn't waste time searching the surface. He would already be underground. Instead, they were hunting. Caleb smiled faintly. They're guessing. For the first time since leaving the assay office, he felt the advantage shifting back toward him. Military training had taught him one simple truth. The side that knows the terrain almost always controls the fight. Broken Ridge had become his terrain. Hours passed. The security team expanded its search across abandoned logging roads and old prospecting trails. Twice they came within a few hundred yards of Caleb's hiding place. Titan never moved, never barked. His breathing remained slow and controlled, despite strangers passing nearby. Caleb gently scratched behind the dog's ears. Still the best partner I ever had. By late afternoon, hunger forced Caleb to make a difficult decision. Their remaining food sat inside the cabin. Returning carried enormous risk. Waiting meant going hungry. He studied the valley carefully. The guards had established a temporary checkpoint on the only drivable road leading to the cabin. 2 men remained there continuously. Professional, alert. Caleb looked west. Beyond the ridge lay an abandoned logging trail almost erased by time. It added nearly 3 miles to the journey. It also avoided the checkpoint. We're taking the long way. The climb tested both man and dog. Deep snow reached nearly to Caleb's knees. The old logging road had disappeared beneath fallen trees and thick brush. Only scattered axe marks carved into ancient aspens hinted that wagons had once traveled there. As sunset painted the mountains in brilliant gold and crimson, Titan suddenly froze. His nose lifted. He sniffed once, twice, then turned sharply toward a narrow ravine. Caleb crouched immediately. What is it? The shepherd remained motionless. Seconds later, voices drifted through the trees. Tracks end here, spread out. He couldn't have gone far. Security patrol. Closer than Caleb expected. He quietly motioned Titan backward. Together they slipped behind a massive fallen pine. Snow muffled every movement. Two armed contractors appeared moments later. They scanned the forest carefully. One studied footprints. The other watched the ridgeline. Neither noticed Caleb only 30 feet away. The first guard shook his head. "Boss says the old soldier won't leave the mountain." The second laughed. "Doesn't matter. We'll find him." They continued downhill. Caleb waited another full minute before moving. The mountain had become a chessboard. Every step mattered. Darkness settled before they finally reached the rear of the cabin. Everything appeared quiet. Too quiet. Caleb signaled Titan to stay. He circled slowly toward the back door. Nothing. No lights. No voices. No movement. Inside, the cabin looked untouched, until he noticed muddy boot prints crossing the wooden floor. Someone had searched the place. Drawers hung open. Blankets had been thrown aside. His notebook lay on the floor. The map of Broken Ridge was gone. Caleb's stomach tightened. They hadn't found the gold, but they had taken something almost as valuable. His notes, his observations, his routine. Titan moved toward the window overlooking the mine. The shepherd suddenly growled. Low, deep. Outside, headlights appeared once again between the trees. Another patrol. Closer this time. Caleb quietly extinguished the lantern. The cabin disappeared into darkness. He rested one hand on Titan's back. "We're leaving." As they slipped silently through the rear doorway into the frozen night, neither man nor dog noticed the faint red light blinking high in a pine tree overlooking the cabin. The drone had never truly left. It had simply been waiting. And somewhere inside Garrett Sloan's temporary command trailer, a monitor displayed fresh movement at the edge of the forest. For the first time, the hunt had become personal. Caleb and Titan moved through the darkness without speaking. The moon hid behind thick winter clouds, leaving only a pale glow across the snow-covered ridges. Every pine tree became both shelter and uncertainty. Every shadow demanded attention. Titan led the way. The German shepherd stopped every few yards, lifting his nose into the wind before choosing the safest path forward. Caleb trusted him completely. Years earlier, that trust had kept entire patrols alive. Tonight, it kept one exhausted veteran breathing. By dawn, they had crossed nearly 7 miles through untouched wilderness. They finally reached an abandoned Forest Service fire lookout overlooking the western valley. Its roof leaked. Its windows were cracked. But no one had visited it in years. For now, it was enough. Caleb spread an old blanket across the wooden floor while Titan settled beside him. Neither of them had eaten since the previous morning. Caleb opened his backpack. 1 can of beans, half a loaf of stale bread, 2 bottles of water. The quartz sample remained wrapped carefully beneath spare clothing. He looked at it for only a second before hiding it again. "It isn't worth dying over." Titan quietly rested his head across Caleb's knee. Caleb smiled weakly. "You disagree?" The shepherd answered with a gentle wag of his tail. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside the lookout tower, silence returned. For the first time in nearly 48 hours, Caleb allowed himself to think. Garrett Sloan already knew enough to send private security into the mountains. The cabin had been searched. His notes had been stolen. Roads were blocked. He couldn't outlast a corporation with endless resources. Not alone. He needed someone who understood land rights. Someone who couldn't be bought. Someone who knew how to fight inside a courtroom instead of a forest. One name surfaced from memory. Nathan Brooks. Years ago, while finalizing foreclosure paperwork, a county clerk had mentioned a local attorney who constantly challenged large development companies. Brooks wins cases nobody else will touch. At the time, Caleb had ignored the comment. Now it might save everything. The following morning, he avoided every main road leading toward Silver Creek. Instead, he drove south through winding county roads until the snow-covered mountains slowly gave way to the outskirts of Durango. Nathan Brooks's office occupied the second floor of an aging brick building squeezed between a family-owned bookstore and a clock repair shop. The brass plaque outside the entrance had faded with age. Nathan Brooks' federal land and mineral rights. The waiting room looked forgotten. Old law books lined wooden shelves. Historical mining maps covered one wall. A coffee pot sat cold beside a stack of newspapers. There was no receptionist. Only a handwritten note. Back in 5 minutes. Titan lay quietly beside Caleb's chair. Several moments later, footsteps echoed down the hallway. A man in his early 60s appeared carrying 2 overfilled cardboard boxes. His gray hair needed cutting. His tie hung loosely beneath a worn tweed jacket. Reading glasses rested halfway down his nose. He looked more like a retired history teacher than a courtroom attorney. Nathan stopped when he saw Titan. Beautiful dog. He earned every gray hair. Nathan smiled. I imagine both of you did. He unlocked his office. Come in. The office was cluttered but organized. Stacks of legal files shared space with antique surveying equipment, framed mining patents, and shelves filled with dusty geological reports. Nathan noticed Caleb studying the maps. Most people don't recognize 19th century federal survey charts. I spent enough years reading military maps. Nathan nodded. Different battlefield. He sat behind his desk. What can I do for you? Caleb remained standing. Instead of answering immediately, he removed the wrapped specimen from his backpack. He carefully placed it on the desk. The room became silent. Nathan slowly removed his glasses. He leaned forward, then froze. Unlike Dennis Holloway, there was no greed in his eyes, only astonishment. He gently picked up the specimen, turned it beneath the desk lamp, examined the exposed vein through a jeweler's loupe. His breathing slowed. My goodness, he whispered almost to himself. Where did you find this? Caleb hesitated. Nathan looked up. If you don't trust me, I'll understand. But if that came from where I think it did, his voice trailed away. Caleb finally spoke. Broken Ridge. Nathan's eyes widened. The abandoned claim? Caleb nodded. I live there. Nathan carefully set the specimen back onto the desk, then stood and walked toward an old filing cabinet in the corner. After several minutes of searching, he carried back a thick leather folder stained by decades of use. Across the cover, someone had written, Broken Ridge Mining Company, 1889 to 1937. Nathan opened the file carefully. Yellowed survey maps unfolded across the desk. Old photographs, government correspondence, mining permits, handwritten engineering notes. I haven't opened this file in almost 20 years. Caleb stared silently. Nathan traced one faded map with his finger. The original miners believed the primary vein ended here. He pointed toward a tunnel matching the one Caleb had entered. But he unfolded another survey. One engineer disagreed. Caleb leaned closer. Nathan tapped a handwritten notation. Secondary ventilation drift. Never completed. Funding ran out before they reached their projected target. Caleb looked up. That's where I found it. Nathan slowly nodded. I was afraid you'd say that. He walked toward another bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound copy of the General Mining Act. The problem isn't whether you discovered gold. The problem is what sits beneath that gold. Caleb frowned. Nathan spread another document across the desk. An original federal mining patent, signed in the 19th century. If Broken Ridge still holds a valid federal patent, he looked directly at Caleb. Ownership becomes much more complicated than Garrett Sloan probably realizes. Hope flickered across Caleb's face for the first time in days. So I own it? Nathan didn't answer immediately. I don't know. What I do know, he pointed toward the ancient survey maps, is that the answer isn't in this office. It's still inside that mountain. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Nathan continued. The original ownership records disappeared sometime before the mine closed. If they survived, they would most likely be stored inside the underground survey office. Caleb remembered the hidden chambers, the forgotten tunnels, the avalanche. Titan suddenly stood. The shepherd walked toward one corner of the office where several rolled maps rested against the wall. He sniffed briefly, then pawed once at an old leather survey case. Nathan laughed softly. Interesting. He opened the case. Inside rested another faded blueprint. He carefully unrolled it. His smile vanished. I don't believe this. Caleb stepped closer. What is it? Nathan pointed toward a section of the mine never included on any modern maps. There was another office, deeper underground, built in 1891. It doesn't appear on county records. Caleb looked at Titan. The shepherd stared quietly at the forgotten blueprint. Nathan slowly rolled up the map. If those records are still there, he paused. They could prove exactly who owns everything beneath Broken Ridge. Outside the office window, snow drifted gently across the streets of Durango. Neither man noticed the black SUV parked across the intersection. Inside, a camera lens slowly focused on Caleb as he left the attorney's office. Someone lowered a pair of binoculars, reached for a radio, and quietly said 4 words. We found the veteran. The transmission crackled through the radio hidden beneath the dashboard of the black SUV. Less than a second later, another voice answered. Do not engage. The order came from Garrett Sloan himself. Follow him. Report every stop. Nothing else. The SUV pulled away from the curb as Caleb and Titan climbed into the aging pickup. Neither of them noticed the vehicle slipping quietly into traffic several blocks behind. Snow drifted lazily across Durango as Caleb drove without speaking. Nathan Brooks's words echoed through his mind. The answer isn't in this office. It's still inside that mountain. Titan sat upright in the passenger seat, his ears twitching with every unfamiliar sound. At one intersection, the German shepherd turned toward the side mirror and stared at the same dark SUV that had maintained a careful distance for nearly 3 miles. Caleb noticed. You see something? Titan didn't bark. He simply kept watching. Caleb checked the mirror. One black SUV, late model, clean, nothing unusual, except it stayed exactly 4 vehicles behind through every turn. Caleb changed lanes. The SUV changed lanes. He exited the highway unexpectedly. So did the SUV. His expression hardened. They're following us. Without another word, he turned onto a narrow county road winding through open ranch land. The SUV hesitated, then continued after them. There was no longer any doubt. Caleb smiled faintly. They're professionals. Titan looked at him. So are we. Instead of heading directly toward Broken Ridge, Caleb spent the next hour weaving through forgotten back roads he had memorized during months of exploring the mountains. By the time the SUV realized it had lost visual contact, Caleb was already climbing an abandoned logging trail hidden beneath towering spruce trees. He parked nearly 2 miles from the cabin. We walk from here. Titan jumped down immediately. Fresh snow muffled every footstep. The mountain welcomed them back with complete silence. By late afternoon, they reached a rocky overlook above the avalanche scar. Caleb unpacked binoculars. The scene below made his stomach tighten. Broken Ridge had become a fortress. Portable floodlights surrounded the buried mine entrance. Temporary fencing blocked the main trail. Snowmobiles stood beside 2 utility trucks. 6 armed contractors patrolled the area in rotating pairs. Garrett Sloan hadn't come to investigate. He had come to occupy. Caleb lowered the binoculars. "They're expecting us." Titan sniffed the cold wind, then suddenly turned east. His body became rigid. Not toward the checkpoint, toward another ridge. Caleb followed his gaze. 3 figures moved quietly through the trees nearly half a mile away. Another patrol, trying to circle behind the mountain. The search area was expanding. "We don't have much time." Night arrived early beneath gathering storm clouds. Caleb waited until complete darkness covered the valley before beginning the descent. He deliberately avoided the buried entrance. Nathan's forgotten blueprint had revealed another possibility. If the old survey office truly existed, there had to be another route. Titan moved ahead through dense forest, following scents invisible to human senses. Twice he stopped to listen. Once he doubled back without explanation. Caleb trusted every decision. The shepherd had earned that trust years ago. After nearly an hour, Titan paused beside a steep rock face hidden beneath tangled brush. Snow had accumulated heavily against the cliff. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. Then Titan began digging, slowly, methodically. Within minutes, a narrow opening emerged beneath the snow. Cold air flowed steadily from the darkness inside. Caleb removed dead branches covering the entrance. The opening matched Nathan's forgotten blueprint almost perfectly. The ventilation drift. Titan slipped inside first. Caleb followed. The passage descended sharply through untouched stone. Unlike the main mine, these tunnels had never carried ore carts. The walls remained rough, hand-cut, narrow. Water echoed somewhere below. The deeper they traveled, the older everything appeared. Rusted lantern hooks still clung to stone walls. Ancient timber braces leaned beneath enormous weight. Some bore dates carved by miners nearly 150 years earlier. History surrounded them. Then Titan stopped. The shepherd sniffed one of the support beams before giving a quiet whine. Caleb examined the timber. Fresh scrape marks. Someone had passed this way recently, not decades ago. Recently. His pulse quickened. Garrett's men hadn't found this entrance. Had they? He knelt. A faint boot print marked the damp earth. Only one. Partially washed away. Impossible to determine how old. Caleb stood. "We keep moving." The passage opened into a vast chamber supported by towering wooden columns blackened with age. Old surveying equipment lay scattered across the floor. Broken measuring rods, collapsed shelves, rotting crates. At the far end stood a heavy oak door hanging crookedly from one hinge. Faded gold lettering remained barely visible. Survey office. Titan trotted forward. The old door creaked as Caleb pushed it open. Dust swirled through the flashlight beam. Inside, time had stopped. Massive ledgers rested on wooden shelves. Rolled maps filled leather tubes. An iron stove sat untouched beneath a cracked chimney. A large drafting table occupied the center of the room exactly as someone had left it generations earlier. Caleb stared in amazement. Nothing had been disturbed. Titan walked directly toward one filing cabinet standing against the rear wall. He sniffed once, then pawed at the lowest drawer. It refused to open. Caleb pulled. The drawer remained jammed. He braced one foot against the cabinet. Pulled harder. With a loud metallic groan, it finally slid free. Inside rested dozens of waterproof document tubes wrapped in oilcloth. One bore a faded wax seal. United States Department of the Interior. Caleb carefully unrolled the first document. Original Federal Survey maps. The second tube contained engineering reports. The third, his breathing stopped. Federal Patent Ownership Register. Signed. Stamped. Recorded. Nathan had been right. The original ownership records had survived. Caleb quickly packed every document into his backpack. We found it. Titan wagged his tail once, then suddenly froze. His ears snapped forward. Low growl. Someone else was inside the mountain. Voices echoed faintly through distant tunnels. Flashlights. Several. Growing brighter. Garrett's search teams. They found another entrance. Caleb switched off his flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. The voices grew louder. Metal scraped against stone. Boots crunched across loose gravel. Titan stood silently beside Caleb, waiting. The first flashlight beam swept across the chamber entrance. Another followed, then another. A voice echoed through the darkness. Search every room. They're in here somewhere. Caleb's heart remained steady. Combat training returned without effort. Observe. Wait. Move only when necessary. Titan slowly shifted closer. The shepherd's muscles tensed. Not from fear, from readiness. Then the mountain answered for them. A deep crack rolled through the chamber. Dust poured from the ceiling. Ancient timbers groaned beneath unimaginable pressure. Every flashlight outside froze. One contractor shouted, "The supports are failing!" Another crack split the silence. Louder, closer. Caleb looked upward. The ceiling had begun to move, and this time, the entire mountain was coming down. The first support beam snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. A second later, another followed. Ancient timbers that had held the weight of Broken Ridge for more than a century twisted under impossible pressure. Dust exploded through the survey office. The contractors outside shouted over one another. "Move! Get out! The ceiling's giving way!" Caleb didn't hesitate. He slung the backpack carrying the original ownership records over one shoulder and grabbed Titan's harness. "We're leaving." Titan was already moving. The German shepherd darted through the darkness, choosing a side passage instead of the route they had entered. Caleb trusted him without question. Behind them, the survey office disappeared beneath a crashing wall of stone. Shelves collapsed. The heavy drafting table shattered. The old iron stove vanished beneath falling rock. History had sacrificed itself so the truth could survive. The tunnel narrowed sharply. Titan squeezed through first. Caleb followed, feeling stones scrape across his shoulders. Another violent tremor shook the mountain. A wave of loose gravel rolled past his boots. The air filled with the roar of collapsing chambers somewhere behind them. Ahead, a faint current of icy air brushed Caleb's face. The exit. It had to be close. Titan suddenly stopped. He turned back. Not because of danger ahead, because Caleb had fallen. A loose boulder shifted beneath Caleb's foot, throwing him hard against the tunnel wall. Pain shot through his injured shoulder. The backpack slid from his back. The document tube rolled toward the edge of a newly opened crack in the floor. For one terrible second, the federal records teetered above the darkness below. Caleb lunged. His fingertips brushed the leather tube just as another tremor shook the tunnel. The crack widened. Titan sprang forward. The German shepherd caught Caleb's jacket in his teeth and pulled with all his strength. The movement gave Caleb just enough leverage to seize the document case before it slipped into the abyss. "You got me?" Caleb whispered, breathing hard. "You got me again." Titan released his jacket only after Caleb regained his footing. The shepherd immediately turned toward the rising slope ahead. There was no time to rest. The mountain groaned once more. They climbed the final incline together. A narrow opening appeared ahead, glowing with pale winter daylight. Titan leaped through first. Caleb crawled after him. The instant he emerged into the freezing mountain air, a thunderous roar echoed behind him. The hidden entrance collapsed completely. Thousands of tons of snow, rock, and timber buried the tunnel forever. Caleb rolled onto the snowy hillside, coughing as clouds of white powder drifted across the valley. Titan stood beside him, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Both were alive. The mountain had closed its final door. Far below, floodlights flashed around Garrett Sloan's temporary command post. Security teams rushed toward the avalanche, believing Caleb had been buried inside. No one looked toward the remote hillside where he and Titan lay hidden among snow-covered pines. Caleb carefully opened the backpack. The waterproof document tubes remained intact. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. We did it. Titan rested his head against Caleb's shoulder. By sunrise the following morning, Nathan Brooks was waiting inside his office. He looked up the moment Caleb entered. One glance at the dirt-covered backpack told him everything. "You found them." Caleb placed the document tubes gently on the desk. Nathan unrolled the first patent with extraordinary care. His eyes widened. He opened another, then another. Each carried original federal seals, survey signatures, ownership transfers, historical engineering records. Finally, he reached the last document. A complete chain of title tracing Broken Ridge from its original federal patent to its lawful successors. Nathan slowly removed his glasses. "This," his voice caught, "changes everything." He spread the maps across the desk. The mining patent was never extinguished. He pointed to several handwritten legal notations. The mineral estate remained legally separated from later surface transfers. Caleb listened carefully. "What does that mean?" Nathan smiled for the first time since they had met. "It means Garrett Sloan has been fighting the wrong case." Caleb frowned. Nathan continued. "He believes this is a standard real estate dispute. It isn't." He tapped the original patent. "This is federal mining law. The ownership of the minerals follows the patent, not the later foreclosure documents." Caleb slowly understood. The land company never owned the gold. Exactly. Nathan leaned back in his chair. And if Garrett knowingly tried to seize property protected under a federal patent, he paused. He has far bigger problems than losing a lawsuit. Across town, Garrett Sloan stood inside a temporary operations trailer overlooking Broken Ridge. One of his security supervisors entered quietly. "We searched the collapse." Garrett looked up. "And? No bodies." Garrett's expression darkened. "What about the survey office?" "Gone." The entire section collapsed. Garrett walked to the window. Snow continued falling across the mountain. He escaped. The supervisor nodded. "We believe so." Garrett remained silent for several moments. Finally, he turned. "Then change the strategy. No more mountain searches. We'll beat him somewhere he can't hide." The supervisor understood immediately. "The courthouse." Garrett nodded. "If Mercer wants to keep that land, he'll have to prove it." He smiled faintly. "And that's where we bury him." 3 days later, the federal courthouse in Denver stood beneath a bright winter sky. News cameras crowded the entrance after rumors spread that one of Colorado's largest development companies faced accusations involving historic mining rights. Caleb stepped from Nathan's truck wearing the only suit he owned. It had been hanging untouched in a garment bag since a military funeral years earlier. Titan walked calmly beside him, wearing a clean service harness. The courthouse doors reflected the morning sunlight. Crowds gathered along the steps. Reporters whispered. Lawyers hurried past, carrying thick files. Caleb paused before climbing the stairs. His breathing changed. Crowded places had always awakened memories he fought to control. Titan immediately pressed gently against his leg, grounding him, steadying him. Nathan noticed. "You ready?" Caleb looked down at the German shepherd. Titan met his eyes. The same calm confidence. The same silent promise. "You won't walk in alone." Caleb nodded. "Let's finish this." Together, the veteran, the old lawyer, and the loyal military dog climbed the courthouse steps, carrying nothing more than a backpack filled with forgotten documents, and the truth powerful enough to change all of their lives forever. The marble halls of the federal courthouse echoed with quiet conversations and hurried footsteps. Caleb Mercer had walked into hostile villages, crossed combat zones, and survived nights beneath enemy fire. Yet standing beneath the high ceiling of the courtroom, surrounded by strangers in suits, he felt a different kind of pressure. Crowds had always been difficult since returning home. The sounds blended together. The movement. The uncertainty. His breathing shortened. Titan noticed immediately. Without a command, the German shepherd moved closer until his shoulder rested gently against Caleb's leg. The familiar weight steadied him. Nathan Brooks leaned over and spoke quietly. "Take your time." Caleb nodded once. "I'm all right. You don't have to prove you're all right." Nathan smiled. "You only have to tell the truth." Across the courtroom, Garrett Sloan entered through another door. His attorneys surrounded him carrying expensive leather briefcases filled with neatly organized binders. Everything about them projected confidence. Garrett looked briefly toward Caleb. There was no anger in his expression, only calculation. He still believed this was a negotiation. He had no idea it was already over. The judge entered. Everyone rose. After the formal introductions, Garrett's lead attorney stood first. He spoke smoothly, presenting maps, property transfers, foreclosure documents, and county records. According to his argument, Broken Ridge had become a financial liability decades earlier. Ownership, he claimed, had passed legally through multiple transactions before eventually falling under Sloan Development Group's control. The discovery of valuable minerals, he concluded, does not invalidate established property ownership. He returned to his seat looking satisfied. Nathan remained calm. He waited until the courtroom became completely quiet before standing. He carried no stack of binders, only one worn leather document tube. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "everything you've just heard would be correct." He paused. "If this were an ordinary piece of land." He carefully unrolled the original federal mining patent onto the evidence table. The yellowed parchment immediately drew every eye in the room. Nathan continued. "This document was issued by the United States government more than a century ago. It established Broken Ridge as a patented mining claim." He turned toward the judge. "Federal mining patents are unique. They separate mineral ownership from later surface transactions unless those rights are explicitly surrendered." He pointed toward several original government seals. They never were. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Nathan produced another document, then another. Original engineering surveys, ownership ledgers, federal registration records recovered from the underground survey office, each connected perfectly to the next, like pieces of a puzzle waiting decades to be assembled. The judge examined them carefully. Garrett's attorneys began whispering urgently among themselves. Nathan continued. "The foreclosure transferred only what Sloan Development Group actually possessed. He looked directly at Garrett. They never owned the mineral estate. Silence. Nathan opened the final document. The original federal chain of title remained intact. He allowed those words to settle before adding one final sentence. Mr. Mercer did not discover someone else's gold. He rediscovered property that legally remained attached to the original federal patent. Garrett slowly stood. Your Honor, the judge raised one hand. You'll have an opportunity. Garrett's lead attorney hurried toward him carrying several law books. Pages turned rapidly. Their confidence disappeared one paragraph at a time. Finally, the judge spoke. The court has reviewed the original patent and supporting federal records. She looked toward Garrett Sloan. The evidence establishes that the mineral estate was never lawfully transferred through the foreclosure proceedings. She paused. Mr. Mercer is the lawful owner of the patented mining rights. Caleb closed his eyes. For several seconds, he simply breathed. Titan leaned gently against his leg once more. The judge continued. Furthermore, she turned another page. The court has substantial concerns regarding the actions taken after this discovery. She reviewed sworn statements describing private security roadblocks, unauthorized attempts to access the mining claim, and efforts to interfere with lawful ownership. These matters will be referred to the appropriate federal authorities for additional review. Garrett lowered his head. The courtroom cameras captured every second. Outside, reporters hurried to broadcast the decision. By sunset, the story spread across Colorado, then across the country. Former homeless Navy SEAL wins ownership of historic billion-dollar gold discovery. The headlines focused on the fortune. Caleb focused on something else. 3 weeks later, he stood once again on the ridge overlooking Broken Ridge. This time there were no armed contractors, no barricades, no drones, only engineers, geologists, and environmental specialists carefully surveying the mountain. Caleb had refused every offer to sell. Instead, Nathan helped negotiate a long-term royalty agreement with a respected mining company willing to operate under strict environmental protections. The mountain would remain protected. The surrounding forests would remain untouched. The local community would finally benefit. The first royalty payment arrived before Christmas. The number printed on the statement barely seemed real. Caleb stared at it for several minutes before folding the paper and placing it back on the table. Titan nudged his elbow. I know. The dog wagged his tail. We've got work to do. Within 6 months, construction began on the first project. Not a mansion, not a private resort. An old vocational campus outside Silver Creek was purchased and completely renovated. Its new sign read, Mercer Veterans Recovery Center. Inside were counseling rooms, medical offices, job training classrooms, temporary housing, a woodworking shop, a fitness center designed for wounded veterans. No one paid to stay there. No veteran was turned away because of money. During the dedication ceremony, Caleb stood quietly near the back of the crowd. He disliked speeches. Nathan handled those. Reporters eventually found Caleb anyway. One asked the question everyone wanted answered. Mr. Mercer, after everything you lost, why spend your fortune helping strangers? Caleb looked toward Titan lying peacefully beneath an American flag. They aren't strangers. He smiled softly. They're people who came home carrying battles nobody else could see. A second project followed. The old fairgrounds outside Durango became a retirement sanctuary for military and law enforcement dogs. Wide grassy fields replaced empty parking lots. Modern veterinary clinics stood beside heated indoor kennels. Every retired working dog received lifetime medical care. No adoption fees. No deadlines. Only gratitude. Dr. Emily Harper accepted the position as the sanctuary's medical director. On opening day, Titan became the first official resident ambassador. Children gathered around him every weekend. Some had parents serving overseas. Others had grandparents who rarely spoke about military service. Titan welcomed every visitor with the same quiet patience that had once helped Caleb survive his darkest nights. One afternoon, Caleb watched a young veteran kneel beside Titan. The man admitted he hadn't slept through an entire night since returning home. Titan calmly rested his head against the veteran's shoulder. Neither said a word. Neither needed to. Caleb smiled. Some wounds never disappeared completely, but they could become lighter when someone chose to carry them beside you. Looking across the valley toward the snow-covered peaks of Broken Ridge, Caleb realized the greatest treasure hidden inside that mountain had never truly been gold. It had been the chance to transform pain into purpose, and that was a fortune no one could ever steal. 1 year later, winter returned to the San Juan Mountains. Snow settled gently across the pines, softening the sharp edges of Broken Ridge until the entire valley looked like a painting brushed in white and silver. Morning sunlight spilled over the peaks, lighting the mountains one ridge at a time. The abandoned cabin where Caleb Mercer had once struggled to survive no longer stood. Time and weather had finally claimed what the avalanche had spared. In its place, farther up the ridge where the ground was stable, stood a handcrafted timber lodge built from locally milled pine and reclaimed beams salvaged from the old mining camp. It was warm without being extravagant, strong without being showy. Exactly the kind of home Caleb had once believed he would never have again. Smoke drifted peacefully from the stone chimney. A weathered American flag moved gently in the crisp mountain breeze. On the wide front porch sat 2 rocking chairs. One was occupied. Caleb wrapped both hands around a steaming mug of coffee as he watched the valley slowly wake beneath the rising sun. The ache in his shoulder never completely disappeared. Neither did the memories. Some nights he still woke before dawn, after dreams that carried him back to places he wished he could forget. Sometimes a distant helicopter still made his heartbeat quicken. Crowded rooms could still leave him searching for exits without realizing it. PTSD had not vanished. It had simply become something he understood instead of feared. He had stopped asking himself why the memories remained. Instead, he had learned to ask a different question. What can I do today? The answer was always waiting. Below the lodge, trucks belonging to the mining company moved slowly along carefully planned roads designed to protect the surrounding forest. Environmental monitors walked the streams. Biologists surveyed wildlife. The mountain was producing wealth without losing its soul. Every decision reflected the promise Caleb had made to himself the day he signed the partnership agreement. Broken Ridge would never again become a place where greed mattered more than people. A pickup truck climbed the winding road toward the lodge. Caleb smiled before it even stopped. Nathan Brooks stepped out carrying a thick folder beneath one arm. His gray hair had become even whiter over the past year, but the old lawyer still walked with the determined pace of a man who believed justice was worth chasing. I figured I'd find you here. You usually do. Nathan laughed. I brought the annual reports. Caleb shook his head. You know I don't read those first. I know. Nathan handed him another envelope instead. Caleb opened it. Inside were photographs. Veterans graduating from skilled trades programs. Families receiving keys to renovated homes. Children standing beside service dogs during community events. A group portrait taken outside the Mercer Veterans Recovery Center. Every face carried something Caleb recognized. Relief, hope. The quiet expression of people beginning to believe tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Nathan sat beside him. You built more than a foundation. Caleb looked across the valley. No. He smiled softly. We built a place where people don't have to pretend they're okay. For a while, neither man spoke. The silence between old friends required no conversation. A sudden burst of laughter drifted up from below. Several school buses rolled into the visitor parking area near the retired K-9 sanctuary. Children climbed out wearing colorful winter jackets. Teachers organized them into groups. Within seconds, excited voices echoed across the valley. Titan heard them before anyone else. The aging German shepherd emerged from the lodge carrying a worn tennis ball in his mouth. His muzzle had turned almost completely white now. His movements had become slower, but his eyes remained bright. The children cheered the moment they saw him. "There he is! That's Titan, the hero dog!" Titan trotted toward them with the same calm dignity he had carried throughout his entire life. He greeted each child patiently, allowed tiny hands to scratch behind his ears, sat perfectly still for photographs. One little boy wearing a camouflage jacket quietly approached Caleb afterward. "Sir?" Caleb knelt beside him. "Yes?" "My grandpa lives at your Veterans Center." Caleb smiled. "How's he doing?" The boy looked toward Titan. "He smiles now." Those 3 words carried more weight than every royalty check Caleb had ever received. The boy reached into his pocket and carefully unfolded a crayon drawing. It showed a mountain, a soldier, and a German shepherd standing together beneath an American flag. Across the top, written in uneven handwriting, were 5 simple words: "Heroes never really fight alone." Caleb accepted the drawing as though it were priceless. "Thank you." The boy hugged Titan before running back toward his class. Nathan quietly watched the exchange. "I don't think the gold ever mattered." Caleb looked toward the distant ridgeline where everything had begun. "No. It just gave us the chance." Late that afternoon, snow began falling once again. Large flakes drifted lazily through the valley as families gathered around outdoor fire pits near the community center. Veterans shared stories with local teenagers. Retired military dogs rested beside former handlers. Children built snowmen where abandoned machinery had once rusted beneath neglect. Broken Ridge no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to people. As evening settled across the mountains, Caleb walked one final trail leading to the overlook above the hidden gold vein. Titan followed slowly beside him. Neither hurried. They had nowhere else they needed to be. From the overlook, the valley stretched endlessly beneath a sky filled with fading shades of gold, crimson, and deep blue. The distant hum of responsible mining drifted softly through the cold air. Years earlier, those echoes might have reminded Caleb of explosions, loss, and survival. Now they sounded different. They sounded like purpose. He reached into his coat pocket and removed a small leather box. Inside rested a new collar. Handcrafted. Simple. Solid brown leather with a polished brass nameplate. Caleb knelt beside Titan. "You've earned one more promotion." He gently removed the old service collar that had traveled across deserts, forests, mountains, and finally Broken Ridge. Then he fastened the new one around Titan's neck. The brass plate caught the final rays of sunlight. 3 engraved words reflected softly against the snow. "Still on duty." Titan looked up at him. Caleb rested both hands against the shepherd's face. "There were days," his voice became quiet, "when I thought I had nothing left." Titan leaned gently into him. "You kept finding the way forward." The shepherd answered the only way he ever had. By staying. Together they sat quietly as darkness settled over the mountains. No helicopters, no gunfire, no fear. Only wind moving gently through the pines. Only the distant laughter of families below. Only 2 old warriors who had survived long enough to discover that the greatest victories are not measured by medals, money, or even mountains filled with gold. They are measured by the lives we lived after finding our own way out of the darkness. And as the first stars appeared above Broken Ridge, the mountain that everyone once abandoned finally became what it had been waiting to become all along. home. If you believe loyalty, courage, and doing the right thing still matter, comment still standing below. I'd love to hear your story. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what we find, but the people we choose to stand beside when life gets hard. And if stories like this remind you what real strength looks like, subscribe and join us for more unforgettable tales of justice, dignity, and perseverance across the American heartland.